On Father's Day, my millionaire son traveled from far away to visit me and asked, "Dad, what do you think of the beach house I got you?" I was in shock and replied, "What beach house? I'm living in the neighbor's garage." When I revealed this, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment which city you're watching from. I never expected my son's visit on Father's Day would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. At 61, I had grown accustomed to disappointments, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Sunday morning. Ethan arrived in his gleaming Tesla, the same confident smile I remembered from his childhood lighting up his face. I was tending to Mr. Miller's garden when I heard the car door slam. My hands were still caked with dirt when my son wrapped me in a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. "Dad, you look great," he said, though I noticed the slight furrow of his brow as he took in my work clothes. "Tending the garden yourself, huh?" I wiped my hands on my jeans, suddenly feeling self-conscious. Ethan looked every bit the successful tech executive. Designer clothes, an expensive watch, that air of prosperity that seemed to follow him everywhere. Meanwhile, there I stood in my faded work shirt, smelling of fertilizer and sweat. "Someone's got to do it, son," I said, forcing a smile. The truth was more complicated. "But how do you explain to your successful son that you're living in a converted garage because his wife told him you preferred your independence?" We walked toward what Ethan assumed was still my house, the two-story colonial where I raised him after his mother passed away. Jessica opened the door with her rehearsed smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She greeted Ethan with a kiss, but barely acknowledged me beyond a curt nod. "Ethan, my love, you should see how well your father is doing," she said in a sickeningly sweet voice. "He's been so busy with his gardening projects." Inside, everything looked exactly as it had when I lived there. My furniture, my photos, even my old reading chair by the window. Jessica had preserved it like a museum, a perfect stage set for Ethan's visits. What he didn't know was that I hadn't slept in that house in over 2 years. We sat in what used to be my living room, making small talk about Ethan's latest business deals. Jessica hovered nearby, interrupting whenever I tried to speak, steering the conversation away from anything too personal. It was a dance we had perfected over the years, and though Ethan had never noticed the choreography. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, leaning forward with excitement, "I wanted to ask you what you think of the beach house I bought you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face go cold, and my hands trembled slightly as I set down my coffee cup. "What beach house?" Ethan laughed, thinking I was joking. "Come on, Dad. The place on the coast, 3 bedrooms, ocean view. Jessica said you loved it when she showed you the pictures." I looked at Jessica, whose face had gone completely pale. Her usual composure cracked for a moment, and I saw something raw and panicked in her eyes before she quickly recovered. "Ethan, your father is getting older," she said hurriedly. "He forgets things sometimes." But I wasn't forgetting anything. I was living in Mr. Miller's converted garage, sleeping on a narrow cot, cooking on a hot plate, and using his outdoor bathroom. For the last 2 years, while Jessica told Ethan I was enjoying my independence and keeping busy with projects, I had been surviving on Social Security and the small amounts Mr. Miller paid me for the garden work. "Jessica," I said quietly, my voice firmer than I felt, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." She shot me a warning glare, the same look she'd been giving me for years whenever I tried to speak up during Ethan's visits. But this time, I couldn't stay silent. "Son," I continued, meeting Ethan's confused gaze, "I don't have a beach house. I haven't had a house at all for 2 years. I've been living in Mr. Miller's garage next door." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror as he processed what I'd just said. "That's impossible," Jessica whispered. "Tell him about the house. Tell him about the money I sent." Jessica stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once in her life, she had no quick answer, no smooth explanation. Ethan stood up abruptly, his voice rising. "Jessica, I sent you $300 6 months ago to buy Dad a place by the sea. Where is that money?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I watched as my daughter-in-law's face crumbled, the realization hitting her that her carefully constructed web of lies was finally unraveling. But what scared me more than her deceit was the look of betrayal slowly spreading across my son's face. After 2 years of silent suffering, of accepting scraps and pretending everything was fine, the truth was finally coming out. But as I sat there watching my family fall apart, I wondered if the truth was worth the price we were all about to pay. The weight of Ethan's gaze felt heavier than anything I had carried in years. As Jessica scrambled for excuses, memories flooded my mind, memories I had tried so hard to bury. I needed him to understand how we got there, how a father and son could become strangers living in the same city. "It all started 3 years ago," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "You remember when I had that heart attack?" Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "Of course I remember. Jessica said you were recovering well, that you wanted to take it easy." I closed my eyes, remembering those first few days in the hospital. Jessica had been there constantly, playing the part of the devoted daughter-in-law, talking to the doctors, handling the paperwork. She seemed like an angel. Then, after I got out of the hospital, I couldn't work construction anymore. The medical bills started piling up and I fell behind on everything. I looked down at my hands, still scarred from decades of hard labor. Jessica offered to help with the paperwork. She said she'd make sure you knew what was happening. "But I never knew," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "She told me you were fine, that you had it all sorted out." Jessica finally found her voice. "Richard, you told me you didn't want to worry Ethan. You said you could handle it yourself." "No," I said firmly, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "I begged you to call him. I asked you every week if you had told Ethan about the foreclosure notice." The word foreclosure hit Ethan like a slap. He sank back into his chair, staring at me with wide eyes. "Dad, why didn't you just call me yourself?" This was the part that hurt the most to explain. "I tried. Every time I called your office, they said you were in meetings. When I called your cell, it went straight to voicemail. Jessica said you were going through a stressful time at work, that she was screening your calls to protect you." I remembered those desperate days, dialing Ethan's number over and over, leaving messages that were never returned. I had thought my son had simply become too successful, too important to deal with his old man's problems. "She told me you got a new phone number for business," I continued, "said she'd give it to me when things settled down." I was too proud to keep pushing, too afraid of being a burden. Jessica's face had gone from pale to red. "Richard, you're making me sound like some kind of villain. I was trying to help you both." "Help!" The word came out sharper than I intended. When the bank took the house, where was that help? When I had to sell everything I owned just to afford my medication, where was Ethan? "You told him I was downsizing by choice, that I wanted a simpler life." Ethan was shaking his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "This can't be real. Jessica showed me pictures of you looking happy, working in gardens, enjoying your retirement." "Those pictures were real," I said. But what you didn't know was that I was working in other people's gardens because I needed the money to eat. Mr. Miller was the only one who would hire a 60-year-old man with a heart condition. I thought of those first few months in the garage. Mr. Miller had found me sleeping in my car after I was evicted. He spoke little English, but he understood dignity. He offered me work and a place to sleep, no questions asked. Jessica would come by once a month. I continued, my throat tight. She'd take pictures of me working, tell me to smile and look healthy. She said it would make Ethan happy to see I was keeping active. Ethan turned to his wife, his voice dangerously quiet. You took pictures of my father living in poverty and used them to convince me he was fine. Jessica's composure finally shattered completely. Ethan, you don't understand the pressure I was under. Your company was going through that merger. You were working 18-hour days. I was trying to protect you from the stress that could have ruined everything we'd worked for. Everything we'd worked for. Ethan stood up, walking to the window. What about what he worked for? What about the man who raised me after Mom died, who worked double shifts to put me through college? The silence stretched between us. I saw Jessica realize her carefully crafted narrative was collapsing. For 3 years, she had managed to keep Ethan and me apart while he unknowingly funded a life I wasn't living. The money I sent for the beach house, Ethan said slowly, still staring out the window. Where did it go? Jessica's hands were trembling. I almost felt sorry for her now, watching her search for another lie that could save her. It's waiting for the right property to come up, she stammered. Real estate prices were so high, I wanted to make sure Richard got the best value. 300, Ethan repeated. For 6 months you've had $300,000 while my father was living in a garage. The number hung in the air like an indictment. I had been living on less than $1,000 a month, rationing my heart medication, eating 1 meal a day, while enough money to buy me a decent home was sitting somewhere, doing nothing. As I watched the truth destroy what was left of my son's marriage, I wondered if I should have just stayed quiet. Some secrets, once spoken, can never be taken back. Ethan walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with a barely contained rage. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by Jessica's shallow breathing. I could see her mind working, calculating, trying to find a way out of the corner she'd painted herself into. "Show me," Ethan said, not turning around. His voice was cold, controlled in a way that reminded me of his mother when she was truly angry. "Show me the bank statements, the real estate listings, the contracts. Show me where my father's money went." Jessica's laugh came out high and brittle. "Ethan, you're being dramatic. The money is safe. It's just what?" He spun around and I saw a fury in my son's eyes I had never witnessed before. "It's just gaining interest while my father rations his heart medication." The words hit me hard. I hadn't told him about the medication, but somehow he'd guessed. Jessica's face went white as she realized just how much Ethan was putting together. "How did you know about the medication?" I asked quietly. Ethan's expression softened as he looked at me, but the anger was still there, simmering under the surface. "Because I know what your prescriptions cost, Dad. I looked it up after Mom died when I was worried about how you'd manage on your own. Men in their 60s don't just cut back on their heart medication unless they have to." He was right. I'd been splitting pills, skipping doses, telling myself it was fine as long as I didn't exert myself too much. Some days, when the chest pains came, I'd sit in Mr. Miller's old lawn chair and wonder if this was how I would die. Alone in a garage, too proud to admit I needed help. Jessica stood up abruptly, smoothing her dress. "I don't have to listen to this. Richard, tell him it's fine. Tell him you chose this life." "Sit down," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the room like ice. "We're not finished here." She sat, but her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white with tension. Ethan pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. $300. $300 transferred to your personal account 6 months ago. The memo said Dad's beach house fund. Where is it, Jessica? The question hung in the air. I watched my daughter-in-law's face cycle through a loop of emotions, panic, calculation, defiance. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "It's in investments." "What kind of investments?" "The kind The kind that will grow for Richard's future." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Really, because according to my bank records, $5,000 of it went to a luxury boutique last month. Another $15,000 for that spa retreat you took with your sister. Should I continue? I felt sick. While I had been eating beans and rice for dinner every night, Jessica had been shopping with money meant to give me a home. While I was wondering if I could afford my next doctor's appointment, she had been getting massage treatments. "Ethan, you don't understand," Jessica began, but he cut her off. "I understand perfectly. You saw an opportunity and you took it. My father was an inconvenience. His problems were messy, so you found a way to make him disappear while still looking like the caring daughter-in-law." Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, concerned woman vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Fine. You want the truth? Your father was a burden. He was sick, he was broke, and you were going to drag us down with him. I protected our future." "Our future?" Ethan repeated slowly. "What about his future? He's old, Ethan. How much of a future does he really have?" The cruelty of those words hit the room like a bomb. I felt something break inside my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. This woman had looked at me, a man who had worked his whole life, who had raised a son on his own, who had asked for nothing but dignity and decided I was disposable. Ethan stared at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out of this house now." Jessica stood, her composure breaking again. "Ethan, this is our home. You can't just... This is my father's home. This is his furniture, his belongings, his life that you've been playing house with for 2 years. Get out before I call the police." "You're overreacting." She tried one last time, but Ethan was already on the phone. "I'm calling my lawyer, then I'm calling the police. You have 15 minutes to pack whatever clothes you need and leave. Everything else we'll sort out in court." Jessica looked at me then, and I saw something desperate in her eyes. "Richard, tell him this is all a misunderstanding. Tell him you're happy with your life." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 61 years in my bones. "The only thing I'm happy about," I said quietly, "is that my son finally knows the truth." She picked up her purse, her hand shaking with either rage or fear. I couldn't tell which. At the door, she turned one last time. "You'll regret this, Ethan. Both of you will." After she left, Ethan and I sat in silence for a long time. The house felt different somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from the very walls. But the damage was done, and we both knew it. "Dad," Ethan said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have checked on you myself." I looked at my son, this successful man I had raised, and felt a mix of pride and sorrow. "You couldn't have known. She made sure of that." "But I should have tried harder. I should have—" "No," I interrupted. "This isn't your fault. Jessica played both of us." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was overwhelmed. "What do we do now? How do we fix this?" I didn't have an answer. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together in the same way. But as I sat in my old chair, in my old house, with my son by my side for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next 3 days were a blur of lawyers, bank statements, and painful revelations. Ethan had taken time off work, something Jessica had always claimed he could never do, and thrown himself into unraveling the web of lies that had defined our family for years. I moved back into my own house that first night, sleeping in my own bed for the first time in 2 years. The familiar sounds, the way the moonlight fell across my bedroom floor, the comfort of my own pillow. It should have felt like a homecoming. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by everything that had changed and everything that couldn't be undone. Ethan had been relentless in his investigation. He discovered that Jessica hadn't just spent the beach house money on shopping trips and spa treatments. She had invested heavily in a business venture with her brother, a restaurant that had failed within 6 months, taking $100,000 with it. Another $50,000 had gone to credit card debts she had hidden from Ethan. The remaining funds were scattered across various accounts, some of which she had emptied just days before Ethan's Father's Day visit. "She knew," Ethan said, pacing my kitchen on Wednesday morning. "She knew I was planning to visit, and she was trying to cover her tracks." I poured coffee for both of us, my hands steadier than they had been in months. Having access to my own kitchen again, being able to make coffee without rationing it, felt like a small miracle. "What did your lawyer say?" "That we have a strong case for financial fraud, elder abuse, and theft." Ethan sat heavily at the table. "But Dad, there's something else we need to talk about." The seriousness in his voice made my stomach clench. "What is it?" "Jessica is pregnant." The words hit me like cold water. I put down my coffee mug, staring at my son's face. He looked exhausted, aged by the stress of the last few days. "How long have you known?" I asked. "She told me last night when I had her served with the separation papers." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "She's 3 months along." I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest, the same weight I had carried for 2 years, the feeling of being an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. "And now you're wondering if you should get back together with her." "No," Ethan said firmly. "That's not what I'm wondering at all. What she did to you is unforgivable. The money, the lies, the isolation. I can't get past that. But she's carrying my child." He nodded, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. This was my son, the boy I had raised to value family above all else. The same values that had made Jessica's deception so effective were now tearing him apart. "Ethan," I said carefully, "what does she want?" "To come home. To pretend this never happened. She claims the pregnancy hormones made her irrational, that she was trying to protect our marriage by not burdening me with your problems." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Even now, caught red-handed, Jessica was spinning another story, another manipulation. "And you believe that?" "Of course not, but—" Ethan looked at me, his eyes full of pain. "Dad, what kind of father does this make me? What kind of man divorces his pregnant wife?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Jessica's car in the driveway. Ethan tensed, his jaw setting in that stubborn line I knew so well. "She's not supposed to be here," he said. "The restraining order doesn't apply to me." I finished. "This is still my house." I opened the door to find Jessica standing there, and for a moment, I barely recognized her. Gone was the perfectly put-together woman who had manipulated us for years. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked desperate, broken, and somehow more dangerous than ever. "Richard," she said, her voice small and pleading, "can we please talk?" Ethan appeared behind me, his presence protective, but tense. "You shouldn't be here, Jessica." "I'm not here to see you," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. "I'm here to talk to Richard, to apologize." I almost slammed the door right then, but something in her voice, a raw desperation I'd never heard before, gave me pause. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of my couch, her hands folded in her lap like a child called to the principal's office. "Richard, I know you hate me. I know what I did was wrong. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it," Ethan said from the doorway. Jessica flinched, but kept her focus on me. "I was scared. When you got sick, when the bills started piling up, I was terrified it would destroy everything Ethan had worked for. This company was going through a merger. We'd just bought our house, and suddenly there were all these medical expenses and mortgage payments, and "And so you decided to make me disappear," I said quietly. Tears began to stream down her cheeks. "I thought it would be temporary. I thought once Ethan's business was stable, once things settled down, we could figure out a better solution. But then months went by, and it just got easier to keep up the lie." Easier for who? The anger in my voice surprised even me. It sure as hell wasn't easier for me, sleeping in a garage, rationing medicine, wondering why my own son had abandoned me. "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Richard. But I'm pregnant now, and this stress isn't good for the baby. Can't we find a way to work through this, for the sake of the family?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice hard. "Now you care about family." Jessica looked at him, and I saw a flicker of the manipulative woman I knew so well. "This is your child, Ethan, our child. Do you really want him growing up in a home broken apart by a misunderstanding?" "A misunderstanding?" Ethan's voice rose. "You stole $300, Zozun dollars, and left my father homeless. You call that a misunderstanding?" "I call it a mistake," Jessica shot back, some of her old fire returning. "A mistake we can fix if you would stop being so stubborn. Richard can move in with us. There's plenty of room in our house. We can be one big, happy family." The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. I looked at Jessica, then at Ethan, and I realized this was the moment of truth. She was offering what looked like a solution, a way for Ethan to have his father and his pregnant wife under one roof, a way to keep the family together. But I had learned something in those 2 years of silence and suffering. I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to be the reason they compromise their principles. "No," I said quietly. Jessica blinked. "What?" I said no. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. "I will not be the excuse you use to manipulate my son. I will not move into your house and pretend everything is fine while you teach my grandchild that lies are acceptable as long as you don't get caught." Jessica's face cycled through a range of emotions: surprise, anger, calculation. "Richard, you're being unreasonable. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of the baby," I replied. "I'm thinking about what kind of person that child will become if he's raised by someone who thinks elder abuse is a misunderstanding. My God." Ethan was looking at me with something that looked like pride. Jessica, realizing she was losing control of the situation, played her last card. "Fine," she said, getting to her feet and placing a protective hand on her stomach. "But when this baby is born and asks why Grandpa Richard isn't in his life, what am I supposed to tell him? That you chose revenge over family?" Jessica's words about the baby hung in the air, a threat wrapped in sentimentality. I watched her stand there, one hand protectively on her stomach, using her unborn child as a weapon in her war for control. It was masterfully done. I had to give her that. She knew exactly how to twist the knife. Ethan's face was a battlefield of emotions. I could see him struggling, torn between his justified anger at Jessica's betrayal and his deep-seated desire to be a good father. The pregnancy had complicated everything, adding layers of guilt and obligation that Jessica wielded like an expert. "You'll tell him the truth," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my chest. "You'll tell him his mother chose lies over love, manipulation over honesty. And maybe, if you're lucky, he'll learn from your mistakes instead of repeating them." Jessica's composure cracked again. "Richard, please. I made mistakes, but I can change. We can all move forward together." "Some things can't be unmoved," I answered. "Trust, once it's broken, doesn't magically repair itself just because it's convenient." Ethan came to stand beside me, and I felt his hand on my shoulder. "Dad, what if we tried family counseling? What if we worked through this together?" I looked at my son, saw the hope in his eyes, the desperate need to believe his growing family could somehow be salvaged. It broke my heart to see him grappling with this impossible situation. "Ethan," I said gently, I need to tell you something that happened last month, something I didn't mention before." Jessica's face went white. She knew what I was about to say. I had a cardiac episode while I was working in Mr. Miller's garden. The pain was so bad I couldn't breathe, couldn't stand. Mr. Miller called 911 and they took me to the emergency room. Ethan's grip on my shoulder tightened. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I tried to call Jessica from the hospital. I begged her to contact you. I told her the doctor said they needed someone to make medical decisions if my condition got worse." I looked directly at Jessica, who was now trembling. "You want to tell him what you said, or should I?" Jessica's voice came out in a whisper. "Richard, please." "She said you were in important meetings all week, that she would handle any medical decisions herself as my emergency contact." I continued, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest as I recalled that conversation. But what she really meant was, she didn't want you to know I was sick again, because if you knew, you might ask questions about why I was living in a garage instead of the beach house you'd paid for. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan slowly removed his hand from my shoulder and turned to face his wife. "You knew he was in the hospital, and you didn't tell me." "Ethan, I was trying to protect you." "From what?" His voice was rising again. "From being there for my father when he needed me, from being the son he raised me to be." Jessica started crying again, but these tears felt different, more calculated, more rehearsed. "I was scared, okay? I was scared that if you knew how sick he was getting, you'd blame me for not taking better care of him. And instead, you decided to let him possibly die alone in a hospital room," Ethan said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "He didn't die," Jessica protested. "He was fine." "No," I said quietly, "I wasn't fine. I spent 3 days in that hospital, wondering if I'd ever see my son again, wondering if I would die without getting the chance to tell him how proud I am of the man he's become." Ethan sank heavily into my old reading chair, his head in his hands. The weight of it all, the stolen money, the lies, the isolation, and now this final betrayal, was crushing him. I wanted to comfort him, but I knew he needed to work through this himself. "There's more," Jessica said suddenly, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "Things you both need to know before you make any permanent decisions." Ethan looked up, exhaustion written across his face. "But now, Jessica, the restaurant investment with my brother, it wasn't a failure. It was successful, very successful." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the business is thriving. My brother bought 2 more locations last month. The money isn't gone, Ethan. It's growing." Ethan stood up slowly, his face cycling through a range of expressions as he processed this information. "You told me the restaurant failed. You said the investment was a total loss." I lied. Jessica's voice was barely audible. "I kept the money in the business because I thought if things ever got bad between us, if you ever wanted to divorce me, I would have something to fall back on." The room felt like it was spinning. This woman had not only stolen my son's money and used my suffering as a cover story, but she'd been planning for the eventual failure of their marriage while playing the part of the devoted wife. "So, let me get this straight," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You took money meant to buy my father a home, invested it in a business, lied to me about the business failing, and kept the profits as insurance against the end of our marriage." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. "But Ethan, I can fix this. The business is worth more now than what you originally sent. We can buy Richard an even better house, a bigger place. Everybody wins." "Everybody wins?" Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad spent 2 years living in poverty while you built a secret nest egg with his money. How exactly does everyone win in that scenario?" Before Jessica could answer, there was a knock on the door. Through the window, I could see a young woman in a business suit carrying a briefcase. "That will be my lawyer," Ethan said. I called her this morning. Jessica's face went pale again. Ethan, please think about the baby. Think about our future. I am thinking about the future, Ethan replied as he went to open the door. I'm thinking about what kind of father I want to be and what kind of example I want to set for my child. As the lawyer came in and began discussing legal options, Jessica made one final, desperate play. She turned to me, her voice taking on that sweet, manipulative tone I knew so well. Richard, you have a grandchild to think about now. Don't let your hurt feelings rob this baby of a relationship with his grandfather. Be the bigger person here. I looked at this woman who had systematically destroyed my life while smiling to my face, who had used my love for my son as a weapon against both of us. And I realized something profound. I didn't need to be angry anymore. Anger gave her power over me, made me reactive and predictable. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete clarity about who I was and what I wanted. Jessica, I said calmly, I will be in this baby's life. Yes, as and when Ethan decides that is best for his child. But I will not be manipulated into it, and I will not pretend that what you did was acceptable just to keep the peace. I paused, letting the words sink in. You keep talking about being the bigger person, but you've forgotten what that actually means. The bigger person doesn't enable lies. The bigger person doesn't sacrifice their dignity for the illusion of family harmony. The bigger person stands up for what's right, even when it's hard. Jessica stared at me as if I were a stranger, and in many ways I suppose I was. The broken, desperate man she had manipulated for 2 years was gone. In his place was someone who had learned the difference between being loving and being a victim. 6 months later, I was standing in the workshop behind my house, running my hands over the smooth surface of a rocking chair I'd been crafting for weeks. The wood was cherry, hand-picked from a local lumberyard, and every joint was perfect. It was the kind of work I had dreamed of doing when I was younger, before life got in the way, before I spent decades in construction just trying to make ends meet. The settlement with Jessica had been surprisingly straightforward. Faced with evidence of fraud and the testimony of both Ethan and Mr. Miller, her lawyer had advised her to cooperate. The business she had secretly invested in was indeed successful, worth nearly $500,000 by the time everything was settled. Ethan received his original investment back, plus substantial damages, and I received enough to secure my future without ever having to rely on anyone again. Jessica had moved back to her mother's house up north to have the baby. Ethan visited her there once a month, maintaining a civil relationship for his son's sake, but the marriage was over. The divorce had been finalized last week. "Dad, that's beautiful work," Ethan said from behind me. I turned to see him standing in the workshop doorway, holding his 3-month-old son in his arms. Little Richard, named after me, much to Jessica's chagrin, was a perfect mix of his parents, with Ethan's dark hair and Jessica's green eyes. But when he looked at me, I saw none of Jessica's calculating intelligence, only the open, trusting gaze of a child who didn't yet know the world could be cruel. "Thanks," I said, setting down my sandpaper. "It's for him, actually. Figured he'd like to have a rocking chair when he's old enough to sit in one properly." Ethan smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "He'll love it. You know, Jessica was wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "She said you'd never be part of his life because of what happened, but you're more involved with him than she is half the time." It was true. Ethan brought little Richard over for visits every Sunday, and I had slipped into the role of a grandfather with the same dedication I once put into raising Ethan. But there was a difference now. No one was using my love as a weapon. No one was manipulating my desire to be useful. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, settling into one of the chairs I had built for the workshop, "about starting over somewhere." I looked up from the rocking chair, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to leave this town behind. Too many bad memories here. Too many people who know our business. He shifted the baby to his other arm. I got an offer from a tech company up in the mountains. Quiet town, clean air, good schools for when Richard gets older. The thought of Ethan moving away should have scared me. After everything we had been through, after fighting so hard to rebuild our relationship, the idea of losing him again was terrifying. But as I watched him with his son, I realized something important. I wasn't the same man who had been left to fend for himself 2 years ago. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, I said, and I meant it. Ethan looked surprised. Dad, I wasn't asking for permission. I was wondering if you'd come with us. The words hit me like a gentle wave. Come with you? Not to babysit Richard. I know you're not looking to raise another baby at 62, but maybe to be near him as he grows up. Maybe to have a real relationship with your grandson instead of just supervised visits. I put down my tools and really looked at my son. He was 35, successful, capable. But in that moment, I saw echoes of the little boy who used to follow me around the house, asking endless questions about how things worked. What about Jessica? Ethan shrugged. What about her? She made her choices, and they have consequences. I won't keep Richard from her, but I won't let her dictate how the rest of us live our lives either. I thought about it seriously. Moving to the mountains meant leaving everything familiar behind. This house, Mr. Miller and his family, who had become dear friends, the small community of neighbors who now knew the truth about what had happened and treated me with genuine respect instead of pity. But it also meant something more. It meant being part of a family again, not as someone to be managed or controlled, but as someone whose presence was genuinely wanted. I do have a workshop full of tools and half-finished projects, I said finally. Ethan grinned broadly. There's plenty of wood in the mountains. I hear furniture makers do pretty well up there. Over the next month, we made plans. Ethan sold his house, the one he had shared with Jessica, the one filled with memories of lies and manipulation. I put my house on the market too, though I held on to it long enough to finish several pieces of furniture I had been working on. Mr. Miller helped me pack. His English had improved greatly over our 2 years of friendship. You are a good man, Richard, he told me as we loaded the last of the woodworking tools into the moving truck. You deserve happiness. Jessica called Ethan the night before we left. I could hear her voice through the phone, high and agitated, as she demanded to know why she wasn't consulted about the move, why she hadn't been given a chance to relocate near her son. Because you lost the right to make those demands when you chose money over family, Ethan told her calmly. Richard will have your address. If you want to be a part of his life, you'll find a way that doesn't involve manipulating or controlling anyone. The drive to our new home took 2 days. Ethan drove the moving truck while I followed in my pickup, baby Richard secure in his car seat beside me. It felt strange to be trusted with something so precious after years of being treated as though I couldn't be trusted with myself. We settled in a town called Green Creek, nestled in the Sierra with a population just shy of 10 Tutors. Ethan's new job came with a substantial signing bonus, enough to buy a house with a separate apartment over the garage, not because I needed to be hidden away, but because we both valued our independence. Within a month, I had my workshop set up in the basement and had begun taking custom orders from locals who appreciated handmade furniture. Word traveled fast in a small town, and soon I had more work than I could handle. For the first time in years, I was building something with my hands, not just to survive, but because I loved the craft. Ethan and I fell into an easy rhythm. He worked from home 3 days a week, which allowed him to be present for Richard's daily needs. I helped out when I could, holding the baby while Ethan was in meetings, teaching him simple woodworking techniques as he got older. sharing the quiet moments that make up a real relationship. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching a 2-year-old little Richard chase fireflies in the yard, Ethan turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad, I owe you an apology." I looked at him, surprised. For what? For not fighting harder to stay connected? For letting Jessica convince me you were fine when my gut told me something was wrong? For being so focused on my career that I forgot about the man who taught me everything about integrity and hard work? I watched my grandson toddle after a particularly bright firefly, his laughter echoing across the valley. "Ethan, we both made mistakes, but we're here now, and that's what matters." "Still," he persisted, "I should have known. A father doesn't just stop caring about his son. If the tables were turned, if little Richard ever tried to cut me out of his life without explanation, I'd move heaven and earth to find out why." I smiled, remembering the fierce determination Ethan had shown when he uncovered Jessica's lies. "You did fight, son. When it mattered most. When the truth finally came out, you chose what was right over what was easy." As if he sensed we were talking about him, little Richard ran over and climbed into my lap, his small hands sticky from the remnants of the ice cream Ethan had given him after dinner. "Grandpa," he said, in his clear 2-year-old voice, "build something." I looked down at this perfect child, this second chance at being part of a family, and felt a peace I hadn't experienced since his father was small. "What would you like me to build?" He thought seriously for a moment, his little brow furrowed in concentration. "A castle, for my knights." Ethan laughed. "That might be a bit advanced, buddy." But I was already picturing it in my mind. A wooden castle, complete with turrets and a drawbridge, perfectly sized for a little boy's imagination. "I think a castle sounds like exactly the right project," I said, ruffling Richard's hair. "But you'll have to help Grandpa in the workshop first. Learning to build something right takes time and patience." As we sat there in the gathering dusk, 3 generations of the same family finally at peace with one another, I realized that Jessica had been wrong about everything. She thought family was about control, about managing other people to serve your own purposes. She thought love was a tool to be wielded instead of a gift to be shared. But real family, the kind we were building here in this mountain town, was about choice. It was about showing up for each other, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. It was about building something together that was stronger than any one individual part. The rocking chair I had made for little Richard sat on the porch beside us, waiting for him to grow into it. But he was already growing into something else, a relationship with his grandfather built on honesty, respect, and the simple joy of spending time together. As I watched him chase fireflies under the protection of his father and the encouragement of his grandfather, I knew we had all found our way home.